Welcome to tutorialsEU. My name is Yannick and I'm your instructor for this video, and today we are going to build a huge web application. For that we will use Sencha Ext JS as a front-end framework, and we will use ASP.NET Core for our back-end solution. And what we want to build is we will build a stock market app, so it just acts like a stock watch list. So we can add new stocks. And as you can see right here, we got Apple, Google, Microsoft stock with the actual price right now, and then the actual historical data over the last month. So this is real data, since we are using here an external API to get some stock market information. So in order to get the best learning experience, definitely stay tuned until the very end and just follow along. Now, in case you haven't subscribed to our channel, do it right now, because you don't want to miss any of our nice programming videos. And if you want to see any specific framework, any specific application to get developed, just create a comment and write it down below. Great, so now let's get started right away. Now, before we can start creating a project using Sencha framework, we for sure have to install it, as we would have to do it with any other framework too, for example Angular or React, right? You also have to install those. Alright, so let's download extjs. You can simply also click here on extjs grid and then scroll down and start your free trial. There's also a community edition which is completely free. So simply click on that and scroll down. Fill out the form, and then you are able to download the installer. Now, after downloading the installer, just go ahead and simply install Sencha. And afterwards go to one of your favorite IDEs. For the Sencha project I use Visual Studio Code, and for the backend project later on I will use Visual Studio. So now in Visual Studio Code, let me open up a new terminal, because we need to run some commands, because for Sencha we need to set up a so-called workspace. So let's do that. Sencha generate workspace. Let's give it a name. Let's call it my workspace. Let's hit enter. Inside of a workspace you can have multiple projects. Now next up, since we have created our workspace, we can proceed and create our application. Again, write down Sencha generate application, add the extension flag. Now we can provide a name for our application, like stock market app, for example, and then we can also provide a directory. Let's call it stock app. Let's hit enter. Our project is now installing some additional packages and then extracting them, and afterwards the project will be set up correctly. So now our project is set up. Let's open up the project here in Visual Studio Code. Don't miss our all access subscription. You can start your free 7-day trial right away, and you will get instant access to all of our programming courses, which contain more than 300 hours of high quality programming knowledge, right? So let me just scroll down. Let me just show you what courses are inside there. Well, we have a complete new course right now, which is the C# test-driven development course. We have an ASP.NET Core 6 course, which is really huge. It's teaching you a lot of web development stuff. We got Python, we got Android, we got the C# complete masterclass, we got Unity. So there is really a lot of stuff and a lot of value in here. And as I said, you can start your free 7-day trial right away, and for sure cancel at any time. So this is a no-brainer for you. Start your trial now and become the programmer you always wanted to be. You can find the link in the description below. Simply click on File and then Open Folder. Now simply select the folder with the directory name, and then you can see that we have an app folder, build folder, and all of that right here. We simply select the root folder, so stock app in that scenario. Let's click Select Folder. Okay, now our application is opened here on the left side, and before we do anything else, let's just run our application. So again, open up a terminal and then simply run the command Sencha app watch, and make sure that you are in the correct folder, right? So you have to run that command really from your applications folder. If not, for sure it will not work. Now let's hit enter. You can see that the build is now processing. Now the application is hosted in the local host, so you can go ahead and visit the application on localhost and then colon and then enter the port 1841. And this is what you will see, right? You can see that Sencha grid right here, and we got, well, a nice looking user interface. and we will for sure bring in some real functionality then. And just a tip for you, if you want to go ahead and, well, start the application on a different port, you can just use the same command. Let me just open up a new console here, a new terminal. Right, you can use the same command, Sencha Ext watch, but then you can use the port flag and, for example, set it to 2222, just in case you want to use a different port. Okay, the application would be available at localhost and then port 2222, but right now, since we already started the app watch, for sure we will get that error here that the app watch is already running for a different port. Now next up, when I switch back to Sencha here, I can close the other PowerShell, that's fine. So if you want to start on a different port, just go ahead, close the application, open it up and start your app watch on a different port, right? If you like to do that. We now move on and create a stock model. So in order to create a new model for our Sencha application right here, we go to the app folder and then you can see the model folder already, right? And here we will go ahead and create our new model. So let's simply click on model and then add a new file here. So open the model folder, click on new file, and let's write down stock.js. Now inside of that stock.js, let me just really resize that console right here. We will now take a look at the base model just to get an idea. So you can see that we are using extjs here, which is part of Sencha for sure. To define a stock market app model base, right? And it extends the extension data model. So kind of inheritance here. Now what we do, let me just copy that over and bring that to stock.js. Now for sure we don't want to call that base, right? We for sure want to call it stock. So don't forget to change that. And then it extends the base model. So we can simply write down stock market app dot model dot base. So extends, so it's inherited from the base.js, so stock market app model, and then you can see dot base just like that. Great, so again, this stock.js is inherited from this class then, for example. Great. Now we don't need a schema here, so let's get completely rid of it. And if you want to look up how all of this is really set together, you can simply check the Sencha documentation. For example, right here, it's about models, right? You can find it at docs.sencha.com. Now the first thing that we have to do is we need to create a store. For that we say stock market app dot store dot stock store. We will create that, and the store is just like the way, or it takes care about providing the data from our backend later on. So we will just create that and later on we will write the backend, and the store is providing the data because it fetches it from the backend. Okay, and then inside of that stock.js, so inside of that stock model here, we for sure have some fields, so kind of properties, right? So write down fields and let's add an array here, and inside of the array we have objects, and the first one is name. You can set it to name. We have type, string, there we go, and then we can adjust that. So the name, you can see how it's defined, right? We got the name set to name and its type of string. We can go ahead and do that 4 times and then set it to price now, which is type of float, starting price, which is also type of float, and the difference between those two prices, so it's called a diff, which is also type of float. There we go. So now we have set up our model, right? It's inherited from the base model. The data gets provided later on from the stock store, and the stock model contains 4 fields, or consists of 4 fields: name, price now, starting price, and diff. Great. As I said, the data of the stocks gets provided from the store, the stock store, which we have created here, or well, we have just mentioned it here, but we now have to create it, right? So close the model folder and you can see right underneath the store folder. Let's open it up. Let's again create a new file here and let's call it stocks store.js for sure. Now let's go to the base.js again, just to copy that over, so I really don't like writing that from scratch. So let's just ext define, and now we provide a name. Stock market app for sure is always the name of our application, but this time it's not a model, it's a store. and the name of that is stocks store. There we go. Now it extends from the ext data store, so not from the base model, it's from the what's called the base store, right? And we also don't have a schema here. Now there are a couple of things that we want to add, and the first one is an alias, and we want to call it store.stocksStore, so that we can really access it very easily. Now next up we want to set the model for this store, and for sure we want to use the model we have just created, which is stock market app model stock. So just write it down here. Now we want to use the auto load functionality so that the store's load method is automatically called. Simply write down here, or let me just add a comma for sure, and then write down auto load, set the value to true. So it's simple boolean. Now again, here we also have some kind of fields. So write down fields, and the value again is an array, and inside that array we have a couple of objects, and the first one is again beginning with name. We have another one, the name is set to price now, and we can just copy it over, right? So price now, starting price, a div, that makes it a little bit easier, starting price and div. Okay, so now we have the fields completely set up, and as I said, the store takes care about providing the data, so we need to add a functionality to really fetch the data from a backend. For example, it could be any application out there, but in that scenario we will for sure write down our own ASP.NET Core backend, which then provides us some real stock data because our backend will connect to another API. So this is just so that you know and understand how you can create a front-end application using Sencha and an ASP.NET Core backend application, right? And in the end we will have real stock market data, and that's pretty cool. So what we need to do is we need to create a so-called proxy, right? So this is where the data comes from. And we cannot really enter a real URL to our ASP.NET Core backend here because we haven't created it yet, right? So let's just write down the proxy and then just enter a fake URL and later on switch it over once we have set up our backend application. So the proxy is using AJAX, which is just asynchronous JavaScript, and that's just the possibility to really fetch data, send data, and make some kind of web requests, right? Now we add a reader, and that reader needs to be defined. The type of the reader is type of JSON, so we will really submit all the information in JSON format. And the root property, we will see that later. Property, we set the root property to items. Now let's add a comma after the reader because the only thing left to set up is the URL, and as I said, we don't really have an URL now, so we can simply write down here HTTP localhost and add a port like 1234, and then maybe we will call the endpoint /stock. So let's keep it like this. We will have to adjust that later on, but that's not a problem. So let's write down here to do adjust. Okay, and this is how you can create a store. And as I said, the store is taking care about grabbing the data from any data source and then providing all of that data to the rest of the application. So if we take a look at our application, it currently looks exactly like this. We got that home with some hard-coded information here. We got some user, groups and settings items on the left side in the tab. However, all of them are really showing just for sure some default lorem ipsum text, and we need to modify that. So on the left side in your project in Visual Studio, just scroll a little bit down until you can see the folder called Classic. And open up the Classic folder, open up the source folder inside, and then you can see the main.js. And if you open it up and scroll to the very top, you can see that this is the main view for the application, right? So this is what we have just seen this is what we see when we launch our application. And if we want to show different content, we can follow just along here, replace this content of this view to suit, well, the needs that we have, right? And we will adjust that now so that it only shows what we want to have. And we for sure want two things. We want to have an overview of our watch listed stocks, and for sure we want to have a form which we can use to well, submit a new stock for our watch list. So here again, we have that extending that inheritance from the X tab panel, which is for sure the layout. We can leave nearly everything as it is. Let's remove the requires here. We will replace them because just in a second, we will create two new elements. One is the form, the second one is the dashboard for our wish listed stocks. Now, what else can we remove? We can get rid of some stuff here. However, we can really remove a lot of stuff, but we can also just let it be for now so that we leave it inside here. So just scroll down to make it as easy as possible for you to follow, right? This is what I'm focusing on right now. Just scroll down until you come to the point items, which is on the left side, the bar or the tab panel with all the elements, the home button, user button, groups button, and all of that. Right, so let's remove two of them. Make sure to not remove the arrow bracket here. Let's just remove the curly braces to the objects so that we only have two left. So home and users. This is what I have right now. We can remove the icon to be FA columns. And we don't make it a list, we make it a main grid. So change it to be main grid. And here title, we set that to form because this is where we will actually later on then add a new stock to the wish list. Let's say FA beer. And then we're gonna set an item here too. So let's copy that over from here. We don't want to bind that. We got items X type will be form. Okay. Now one more thing that we need to add here is we need to render it to the extjs body, to the body of our page, right? So add a comma at the very bottom and let's say render to x.get body. There we go. We don't need to add a semicolon here, so this will result in an error, so don't add a semicolon. Okay, so let's save it for now. Yeah, because if you take a look at the web app now and we update the page, and you can see that we don't see anything, and that's quite okay right now because we don't have defined any sort of views, so we have no elements to display anymore. So let's just add them. Inside of that source folder here, where we got our main.js, let's add a new file. So right click on it, add a new file, and let's call it grid.js. Okay, we want to define it, so call ext.define. Let's call it exactly like our other elements. So let me just get that line of code here. There we go, xdefine, closing brackets, just like that. Okay, let's change the name, stock market app, and then we don't want to call that main, we want to call it grid. Great. Now let's get started. Let's add an extend. So this one is inherited from x.grid.panel. So we have a panel here. Just think of it like a view. And we have a store. So what do we want to display here, right? And the type of that store is stocks store. So make sure that you write it really in that lower and uppercase as you have created it, right? So if you said go to stock store, if you just wrote down in the alias stock store, you have to write it in capital letter just like me. So stock store. So this is case sensitive. Now let's move on. We got the X type. And this is main grid, so that we really display the data inside of a grid. Let's also provide a title. So title, let's set the title to stocks. Okay, now we can define the columns. So let's set columns to be an array, and inside of that array we can for sure define some elements. So let's define some elements, and they have a text. So text equals to name. This will be the name of the stock. Data index set to be name. We see what that does just when we insert our data and set the flags to 1 for that. Okay, now let's add a comma. Let's duplicate them just 2 times so that we have 3 in total because we need price now. Data index is price now, right? That's the name of the field that we have created for it. And starting price, set it to starting price here. And now we will add a so-called widget. We can also do that inside of the columns here. So if you haven't seen that before in Sencha, you can have inside of a column, you can have simple fields like name and price and all of that, but you can also have widgets, something like lines and charts and all of that. So we will create a widget here. Let's add one, and that text for the widget is difference. between the price now and the starting price. We'll calculate that from the API. However, then we got the data index and we created a field called div for that. Now let's set the X type, set it to widget column, so that it's widget inside of a column. Right now we need to define that widget, so it's called widget and it's an object, and in that object we have an X type again, so you can see in which direction we are developing using Sencha. Right, we always have to define those X types to define what an element actually is, so progress bar widget here. And next up we got the text TPL, and we want to display the percentage here. Okay, so value %. Now finally, let's add just some flex here. So set flex to 1. Great, so this is all we have to do for the columns. So let's add one more comment here. We want to render to body here, render to x.getBody. There we go. So again, we want to display that later on inside of the body, right? So if we now switch to our app, we will still see nothing, and we need to go to the main.js and now start setting them required so that we actually use that grid.js or that grid element inside of the main view. So open up single quotes and write down stock market app .view.main.grid in capital. And if you want to see that grid now, let's just remove the form from that field here, save it like this. We will just re-add it in a second, but now you can see the grid actually. So switch to the web application. Now make sure to update the page. So simply hit Ctrl F5 or just F5, and then you can see home and stocks, right? So this is name, price now, starting price, difference, and all of that. Great, so now let's add the layout for the form so that we can add new stocks to our application. Great, so let's just Ctrl Z here to really bring in the title form again. Let's save like this, and let's add a new file to the view main folder. Right click, new file, let's call it form.js. Let's copy over the grid.js inside here. Let's just paste it. So let me just grab everything and paste it here. There we go. And now I can really modify everything. So I want to call it view main form. And it extends from Ext form panel. It does not have a store, and the X type is set to form here. Now we can for sure set a title like add a new stock, for example, and we can get completely rid of the columns and render to sections, so we don't need that. Okay, and from here we can start defining new stuff. For example, let's set the width of the form to be 350 pixels. Also, we can add some body padding. Let's set it to 5. Now the main part for sure is grabbing data. So let's set a URL. Let's set it to http ://localhost 1234 and then slash stock again, or whatever we just need to do. Adjust, right? We need to adjust that later on once we have that backend endpoint. Okay, let's add a comma here after the endpoint, and let's adjust even further. As an HTTP method, we will use post because we want to post something to our backend application, right? So hey, just add a new stock to my watch list. This is a post method. You know, there are a couple of methods out there. You got get, update, post, and delete. And this is post. So post is for creating something new on a server, right? Awesome. Let's get to some styling of the form elements. As layout, we want to use anchor here, and then go ahead and use defaults. Let's set it to anchor 100%. Great. So as I said, this is just some simple styling, and now we can define the actual fields. So we have one field here. Let's set the default type to text field. Let's add items. This is again an array. And inside that array we have an element. So we will just have one input field inside of the form, right? So we want to use as a field label, name, of the stock for sure. Name input, so INP. That's what we want to set as a name tag. And then allow blank set to false, because we don't want to accept null values or null-like values, right? Okay, let me just bring that in a correct position here. There we go. Allow blank false. Okay, now we don't need anything else right now for that specific form, right? But now you know how you can add new stuff. And again, like, you can really look up all of those concepts really in the documentation, which you can find on Sencha. Let's just move on. We're gonna say JSON submit set to true. We want to submit JSON here. Now the final elements that we want to add for that form for sure are buttons, right? Because we need to have a submit button. So let's set up a buttons array, and inside of that array we only have one single object. So open up a new object here. Let's set the text of this button to be submit. Now let's bind it to the form where the button is included in. Now we want to set that to disabled by default. So disabled will switch over to be enabled if the form validation is true. This is why we use form bind here in combination with disabled. Now we can set a handler, which is a function, and inside of that function we first of all pick the actual form. We use form equals to this up. So we grab this dot up and then define form. So this will make sure that we grab our actual form. Now we want to take a look if the form is valid. So form.isValid, you can check for that. We get a boolean here for sure. And if the form is valid, we want to do form.submit. So we now submit it, and inside of that call we can register a success callback, for example. So form submit, let's just do a success callback here, success, set it to function, form and action. Now we can check for the status code, but we don't need to do that. We can simply go ahead and call ext.msg for message.alert, and now we can really again set up something new. So we want to show a message which is success, and then some more detailed information. The stock got added to your wish list, for example. Awesome. So this is for success for sure. We can also set up a failure handler. So let's do that. Failure. Set up a simple function. We can simply go ahead and just do it real quick. Let's call ext.msg.alert, and let's write down failure, and then oops. Something went wrong. Awesome. Cool. So now we got the form ready. And what we want to do is we now want to go into our main.js, or scroll to the very top. Let's copy over the name here, stock market app view main form. Let's copy that, go to main.js, scroll to the very top, and let's set it in the requires. And let's for sure put that in single quotes. There we go. And if we scroll down, we can see that we have that form here, and it absolutely matches the type, the X type, right? Okay, so go to the application and update the page. Now you can see we got that nice beer icon here and that form, right? So we can add something new here. I mean, this is font awesome. There are so many icons, you can pick whatever you like. Here we got our stocks, which is for sure empty right now because we have no real data source yet. And here we have our form. You can see add a new stock. We can enter a new name. If you want to add a stock later on, you don't write down like Apple. No, you take the symbol, which is for Apple, APPL. You can look it up. Well, on Google, for example, right? Google has its own tag, Facebook or Meta has its own tag. So it's called symbol, and each stock has its own unique symbol. Great, and this is all we have to do from the side of Sencha for now. So now we will switch over and write the backend logic for this application inside of ASP.NET Core. Open up Visual Studio 2022 and create a new ASP.NET Core Web API project. Make sure that you pick this the correct template here. It's ASP.NET Core Web API. You can see it right here, right now. Okay, so let's select that and let's call it Stock Market app backend. Let's hit next. Select .NET 6, configure for HTTPS, you can do that. We don't need Docker here, we need no authentication or what else. Just make sure that enable OpenAPI is checked here and then click on create. Okay, so the first thing that we want to do is we want to go to program.cs inside of the project, and I want to show you that we are able to use Swagger and Swagger UI. So this is a nice way for us to very easily test the functionality of our API which we are about to develop. So just check here, you can see use Swagger and Swagger UI. We'll get to that just after we created the first endpoint. Now let's create our first, well, let's call it model, right? So it's just for transferring some information between our endpoints now. However, you can create a model folder, but since we only have really like this small functionality right now, I will just create a new C# class right inside of the main root folder. As I said, if you want to extend it or you have a different functionality, you maybe want to create a data or model folder, right? So let me right click on our project and add a new C# class, and we for sure call it stock.cs. Now, if you like, you can for sure remove the weather forecast and all of that default stuff. Okay, so we want to build up a bunch of properties here. So let's write down prop, press tab to fold out the property structure. Let's call it name. Now next up, got prop float price now, prop float starting price, gotta have prop. Let's make a list of type float. Let's call it div, and public stock as our constructor for string name, float starting price, float price now, and list and list, there we go, float div. Awesome. So now let's set up the values from the constructor and assign it to those fields. So this name equals to name, right? So I just wanted to point that out. This name is for sure referencing to the property, and name is referencing to the parameter right here. So you don't need this anymore, it's obsolete, but just think of it that way. This is why I like to introduce this in order to explain it a little bit better. Price now, set it to equals to price now, starting price equals to starting price, and div, set it to div. Really, as I said, pay attention on that lowercase and uppercase here, so you don't want to make a mistake, because if you do, later on the value will be not set correctly for sure. Okay, so now we have our model fold out. Open up the controller folder and you can see that weather forecast controller, and we have two options now. We could leave it here, rename it and work with this, so go ahead, do that if you like. We can also get rid of the weather forecast stuff. So if we want to do that now, so if we decide to remove the controller, then you should also remove the weather forecast class. So let's just do that. It's okay if we remove it here. So let's remove the weather forecast class and then the weather forecast controller. Okay, so this should result in no compilation errors. That looks fine. Awesome, so let's create a new API controller. Right click on the controller and add a new controller. Go ahead and select the API controller, very important. Don't select the MVC controller, select the API controller and then API controller empty. Now let's hit add and write down stock controller. Now you can see the default route to that API endpoint would be like localhost port and then /API and then /stock, right? Controller will get removed, so the suffix will get, well, we get rid of that. So the controller name is stock. So it would be API/stock, but I don't want to have that /API/stock. I just want to have /stock. So I just remove API/ here from the route. So right now I only have route and then controller here. So the actual route in the end would be /stock. As I said, controller always gets removed. Now,
It's inherited from the controller base, so everything here is set up nicely, that's fine. We can now continue with the logic of the stock controller, and first of all what I want to do, since we don't have a real database, we don't have an SQL database and all of that, we just store the information during runtime for sure. So we create a static, definitely make sure that it's static, if not it will not work. Public list of type stock, let's call it stocks, equals to new list stock. There we go, and we can for sure add something to that list during initialization. So let's just add a new stock to that list, and that stock we can set it up for Netflix, for example. So as I said, we need to add a symbol, and the symbol for Netflix is NFLX. They're always 4 digits or 4 characters. Now next up we got the starting price, just some initial values, and the price now, and then a new list of type float. This is just some example testing values, right? So don't get me wrong, we will for sure use some real values. Let's just enter some stuff here. Okay, there we go. Really just for testing purposes. Okay, so here we have our new stocks list with 1 entry, which is Netflix. Okay, so now what we will do is we will use that API here. So you can just sign up and you will get a token, and this is where we can actually grab some stock information. And yeah, as I said, just sign up, grab your token, and we will use that just in a second. Now back in our API, let's just use some more namespaces. So let's get started with using system.collections and using .system.net, and also what we want to use is using .system.net.http, so that we can make some web requests, and we will also use some sort of JSON. So we now go to tools, NuGet package manager, and we will install a package which is for sure newtonsoft.json. I mean, many of you already know it, right? So newtonsoft.json, let's just search for that and then go to browse, not installed for sure. And there we go, newtonsoft.json. We want to install that for this specific project. Great, now close NuGet package manager, there we go. And then we can start using newtonsoft.json, and in this case what we want to have is link. You will see that just in a second. Now let's get started by creating a method which is actually able to read data from a URL, so from an API endpoint, for example, right? So let's create a static private string method, let's call it getData, and let's set the parameter URL, which will, for example, be an endpoint to that API I just showed you for the stock information. Let's set up a request. You can see that automatically fold out here. So we go ahead and say var request equals to, let's add a cast directly to HTTP web request dot create, and we create it for that URL from the parameters. So all of this is just standard .NET Framework C# code, so nothing really excited here. Let's go ahead, let's configure that request to be type of get, because we want to get information. Now we can for sure fold out some sort of try catch. Let's do that so that we catch any exception here, and then we can then just return null if something goes wrong. That's totally fine. And yeah, we want to go for exception E here. That's fine. We don't really care too much about what exactly the exception is. And yeah, you can return null like this, or you could also go ahead and return it for sure like that. Great. Now let's send our web response. So using var web response equals to request.getResponse. Now we need to read that. So we send the request. Now we get the response of that request, whatever the API is just getting sending to us, right? Let's set up a stream, web response.getResponse stream. Now we need to read that stream using var reader equals to a new stream reader. Configure it for that web stream. Now let's read the data. So var data equals to reader.read to end. So we completely read the response, and then for sure we can return that data, because that's what the API just delivered to us. Okay, and we will use that method. And if you are just sending requests to other endpoints so that you can really get data like weather data, financial data, sports data, or whatever. This is like a helper function that you will fold out a lot of times, right? It's just sending requests to a specific URL. We haven't even defined that yet, but it's just delivering us the response, and this is what we want to have. So this is like a generic helper function. Let's get started with a simple method. Let's call it get price, and this is for getting the current price, for example, of a specific stock. So let's set a parameter param, then we can enter the token here. So go ahead and use your own token for sure for the API. You can just copy paste your token inside here. I will just do that in a second. Now let's continue and set up the URL to fetch the data of a stock. Let's use string.format. There we go. Let's just bring it into the next line of code so it's easier to read. It's https://cloud.iexapis.com/version1 of the API/stock. Now again slash, let's insert our data here. So let's write down 0 and then slash and then quote, there we go. And then we can add the token, so 1. Great, now let's add param here, which is the stock, right? And then secondly, we adjust the token value. So I will again bring that into the next line of code so that you can even read it easily, more easily. There we go. Okay, so this is our URL now. As I said, we're using a string format, so this value here will get replaced with param, and the token value, or here that 1, will get replaced with whatever the token is. Okay, let me just make that look nicer. Great, so go ahead and copy your token right now. I just did that, and I will put it inside here. Okay, so now that we have that set up, let's fetch the result. So var result equals to get data, right? There is our magical helper function. So get data from a specific URL, and then we check if result equals to null, we want to return -1, right? This is a typical behavior. So if we have any issue here, we need to return a float, right? So we return -1. Okay, you can now see that we have some reference errors here, and the problem is that those methods that are created are actually outside of the stock controller. This is because I'm very close zoomed in, right? So I wasn't able to see that brace there. Let's go ahead and put it right into the stock controller class, right? So there we have in the end 3 closing curly braces. That's just how it needs to look. Awesome. Okay, so now we can move on because our result is now working here, and we can simply take that result and now create a JSON object from it. So let's take JObject JSON equals to JObject. Let's parse it. So we take the result and parse it into JObject, and now we can check for any values inside of that JSON object. So let's use it like a dictionary, right? JSON latest price. So we want to see if we have a latest price, and if we don't have one, we want to return -1 again, and then every other scenario we want to create a float from that. So we're gonna cast it to float. Let's take the JSON and take the latest price and then return that price. So what we did basically is we just sent a request, we grabbed the response, we turned it into a JSON object which we can read from C#. That's why we use JObject here. We checked like a dictionary if it contains the latest price field or just the key value pair latest price, and if it does, we convert it into a float and then return that float. So this is basically what we have done here. Okay, so now let's just write a method which we can call from our Sencha project to get all the stock information. And we will create an HTTP GET method. So let me just write down here, let me just zoom in even more, public IEnumerable, and it's of type stock because we want to get a collection of stock data, right? So let's call it get, and definitely don't forget to assign an attribute which is called HTTP GET. This is very important. Now what we want to do is we simply want to, well, grab the latest stock information, right? So we need to update all of our stocks, for example, and then we want to return it. So just return all of our stocks. So they are not really updated yet, stocks, but we prepared everything. So stocks for sure is our list here, right? And those are initial values. And before we really submit them, we want to really update our stocks. So this is what we're gonna do now, and we make it pretty simple. We don't focus on a lot of algorithm stuff right now. It's really more of a basic structure, how to set up a front end and the back end project and connect them together. So what we do is we write down here for each tab, let's go, var stock in stocks. There we go. So for each stock in stocks, we want to do float price equals to get price, right? So this is now starting for sure our sending of the requests that we need to update our stocks. Stock name, there we go. This is the parameter which will get attached to the URL. So for example, for Netflix it will be NFLX. That would get then sent to the API, and we would get an update on the price. And then we can, for example, null check. So if price is smaller than 0, that would be an issue, for example, and we can simply say price is equals to 0. So there are no negative values allowed here, right? Now set the stock.price now to be price, and stock.diff. So let's add a difference. We can adjust that later on even further, but let's keep it very simple for now. What we're gonna do is, I mean, it doesn't look simple right now, but it is stock.price now. We simply take the price now and just subtract the starting price. Now let's divide that by stock.starting price divided by 100. And all of that is again divided by 100. So we divide it by 100 again because we want to have the difference in percentage. So we take this price now and the stock starting price. There we go, not to string, right? Stock starting price. So stock now and stock starting price, and we want to know what the difference between those values is. So starting price right now doesn't mean like how was the price when the stock market opened today or something like that. Starting price is the price at the moment where we add it to our wish list right now. So we will extend that functionality later on. Let's just get started. And this is a very easy way to show a difference, an actual difference between two prices in a percentual way. Now that for each loop, we'll now update each stock in our list. Maybe it's not the best way to handle that, but it's the simplest way, and that's important for now, right? Great. So afterwards we return the stocks, and that's perfect. So what happens here is we call that get endpoint, all the stocks are updated, and then we return the latest data as a response. Now there are two more things that we want to add. We want to add a find method so that we can find an element by a unique ID, for example. So what we want to do is we want to create a new endpoint. Again, it's get, and this time this takes, let me just zoom in more here, HTTP get, and this time it takes an ID. Okay, now let's write that method. Let me just add some space. It's public async task action result of type stock. There we go. Let's call it find async, and as I said, it takes a parameter called ID. And now we can use some pretty simple expression here to just grab the correct elements. So we take the index equals to stocks dot find index, where the index x goes to x name equals to ID. So we get a stock from our stocks list by ID, which is by name, right? And name is just like the ID in that scenario. And if the index is equals to -1, then we have no result, right? So let's return a not found, which is an actual real 404 error 404. And in every other scenario, we simply return an OK, which is a 200 status code, and we return stocks and insert the index, which will then point to the requested or searched for stock. Awesome. Let's just remove that async. We don't really need that. It's okay if we keep it synchronous. So we can simply call it find. And there we go. Okay, that's better. Now let's move on. Because there's one more thing left, which is actually creating, right? Because we want to create or add something to our wish list, or our, not, let's call it wish list, watch list, right? Watch list is a better term. So let's create an HTTP post endpoint here. Let's call it public iAction result. Let's call it create. Now inside of that create method, we want to use a parameter, and therefore we have to match the structure of the API. So you can create that class that I'm about to create in a new file, but you can also do it just as I do, public class param. That's just how the API is designed. So public string name input get set. That's what we have to create here. Now let's just scroll up. Param. So we are about to create something new. Let's again take the index because we need to check for duplicates. So int index equals to stocks dot find index. We exactly doing the same thing again, right? X goes to x name equals to param dot name input. And if index is bigger than -1, which means that we have found an item, we can return a bad request. So like a duplicate tried entry, right? So this is not what should be allowed. So the user tried to do a bad request. Now let's send a request to the API for the price again, so that we get the information immediately. That's why we have that get price method, and we can for sure again take the param.name input, because that's where the actual stock symbol is saved. And if the price for that is smaller than 0, we again have a return bad request because something went wrong. Now finally, we want to add that new added stock to our list. So let's call stocks.add. Let's add a new stock. We can just fold that out here. And what we want to do is we want to, oh no, we don't have to do it that way. We can directly use the constructor param.name input and price for the actual starting price, and the price now is also the exactly same value. As I said, we will extend it later on. And then we have the difference, and for the difference we simply take a new list of type float, and we want to initialize it with just null because there is no difference yet. Great, so now we have added the stock to the list. Let's just return an OK statement. So everything worked successfully. Awesome, so let's save like this. Now I want to show you Swagger, so just go ahead and start your application, just hit run right here. Okay, so there's our application. You can see we're using HTTPS. You can see that at this nice looking log here. This is why the port now is different, but if we want to use HTTP, you can also do that. Just change the port. However, you can now see that our stock controller, this is stock controller, right? We have 3 endpoints. One is get, for getting a specific information. Another one is stock, so let me just add something to my watch list, and then we can get like the information of one specific stock. So get all stocks, get one specific stock, and all of that. Yeah, and if you want to try that out, you can simply go ahead and try that out and write down some information here, right? So we can simply execute it, for example. And you can see that we get a response, and yeah, here is our Netflix information for sure. This is not real data right now, but we are working on that, right? So even if we go to get stock by ID, for example, let's just take that symbol. Let's write that down here, try it out, and then ID NFLX, let's hit execute. Yeah, and you can see that we also here have a response. So that's quite nice. We also can do is go to stock posting. Let's try it out. Yeah, and here we got the name input. Let's just change it and add AAPL for Apple stock. Let's hit execute. And again, you can see we got 200, which is a success status code. And now if we go to our first get stock request, we can simply try it out again, hit execute, and we should have now APPL inside here, and the price now is 168.49. So this data is like real. So the actual price now, or the last closing price, is like 168.49, right? So this is like dollars. Okay, this works fine. This is how you can use Swagger to actually test your API. And now that we have verified that this is working, we can now switch over to Sencha and start using our application and wire both applications together. Okay, so now in our ASP.NET project, go to program.cs, and if we scroll down, you can see use HTTPS redirection. Let's just disable that. Just comment it out. There we go. And let's start our application. And if I now put in my localhost link with that port for the HTTP, so I changed that, it's now localhost 5283, right? I just gonna copy that. You can see that Swagger is still available, but it's not HTTPS, it's HTTP, right? So now keep that running. So it's running right now. As I said, I use this one here, so copy that and keep the application running, and now open up the Sencha project. And what we want to do is inside of form.js now adjust that URL here, right? So let's just do that and write down /stock, because that's the name of our controller. Also, we want to do that in the stock store.js. Here we got our to-do adjust also written down. So let's do that again, /stock. Awesome. So save it. And now take a look at our Sencha application. And as you can see, we don't have any information here. And if we try to do something, let's click on APPL and submit. You can see if I open up the console, there was like something went wrong. You can see that we have an issue here, which is saying XML HTTP request got blocked from origin because of CORS. And CORS means cross origin resource sharing. And we need to enable that so that we can actually send requests between those two applications now. Now, CORS is occurring pretty often, and that's what I want to show you how you can fix it. So here we got the app builder in program.cs in our backend application in ASP.NET Core, right? And what we want to do is we want to configure the app to use CORS. There we go. And that's not all, because we need to define the builder and set the builder with origin. I will explain that just in a second, but it basically means that any URL now is allowed, and we can even extend that and say .allow any method, so get, post, put, patch, and all of them, and .allow any header. And there we go. And this basically just allows us to use our Sencha application to request data from another application, because even though they are both on localhost, they are different. They're running on different ports, so we need to configure CORS. Again, let's start our application, and while that's starting in the background, we can just switch over to our Sencha application. So here I got that opened. Let me just close it. Let me just go to home, switch over to form, and write down AAPL. This is the symbol for the stock. Let's hit submit. You can now see success. The stock got added to your wish list. Let's hit OK now, and let's switch over to home. You can see that we don't receive any stock, right? So we can definitely tell that we now have added something to our list, right? So the success call, we just received that, but we don't get the list in total. So let's just simply take a look why this is happening. And the issue is just because auto load here is written in camel case. So switch the L to be a capital letter. That's all you basically have to do. Now take a look at the application again, and ASP is running in the background. And if we now update the application, you can see that both stocks are now showing up. We got NFLX and APPL. Okay, so displaying stocks and adding new stocks to our watch list is now working fine. So our next step is to really extend the functionality of this application. Right now we have a starting price and the actual price, right? So the starting price is the moment when you add it to the list, and we really want to change that because now we can really grab some data, but what we are displaying right now could be definitely more valuable, right? So we have that widget here, and even though the API has that widget right now, it's already prepared for something else because we really want to have that historical data. So what we want to do now is we want to well, set that starting price. We want to get rid of that and instead really want to show some historical data here. So a price, well, evolution, right? So as a nice chart. And we have most stuff prepared already. We just have to change the widget type here, and we need to make another API call for historical data. And then we have a really valuable application which is offering more information.
All right, so let's move on and add some real functionality for our difference here so that we can actually, for example, show a line chart. For example, we can completely remove the starting price because that was just to show you how we can really, well, add fields to the entire application. But now we want to really bring in some more value to the user. Great, so let's just proceed and move into our stock model.js. So on the left side, go into the app folder, model, and then stock.js. This is our stock model. And inside here, let's just remove the starting price because we are now only interested in the price now and then a really nice chart with some historical data. Great, so let's save it like that. Now let's move on and do the same thing here in stock store. So let's get rid of this starting price that we have right here. Okay, and then we can save it and move to our grid.js to add the new widget. So let's take a look what we got right now. Inside of the columns we have name, we have price now. We can keep that and keep it in flex, so just as it is. And then we got the starting price right here, and we can completely also for sure remove that. And now we take that widget here and we will configure it to be a different widget. So let's take that widget and turn it in some historical data. For example, price development of that stock for the last month. It's still a widget column, but we changed the X type to be a so-called spark line. So spark line. Now we can define a fill color for this. So fill color is set to, for example, that value here. You can just copy paste it and see that just in a second. Then we have a width. We can set the width to 100, for example, and then we also have the height. So height, set it to 20. Now we keep it in flex and we got the render to body. Awesome. So this is also changed now, right? Also, you can see this widget configuration at the Sencha documentation for sure. And now if we take a look at our application, if you update the page, and as I said earlier, you need to make sure that the ASP.NET Core application is running in the background, because if not, and you start that Sencha app, he's trying on startup, right, when the project is launched, because we got that auto load flag, he will try to reach ASP.NET Core backend, but it will not be available and we will for sure not get any values. So make sure that you have everything set up. And then we got Netflix here, for example, and we got the last month. And you can see that we have some actual data inside here. Right now it's not correct data because we haven't configured it in ASP, but you can see that chart right here. Awesome. Great, so let's move on. So first of all, let me just stop our application. And what we now have to do, we now have to adjust our difference, well, list or array, whatever you want to send here, right? We need to adjust that. Because as you can see, those are the values that we have seen in the line chart, but we for sure need to adjust that to actually show some real historical data inside here. So what we want to do exactly is, if we scroll down to the moment when we create something, you can see that right here, right? iAction result create. So we add a stock to our watch list. And you can see that when we add it to our stocks list, we are just setting the current price and the starting price, right? And that was just like to show how we can submit data to Sencha. And then for the difference, for the historical data, we're sending an empty list, which for sure didn't make sense back then, but it makes sense right now. And the only thing that we have to change now is to adjust the values here. So we need to make an API call and grab the historical data of the last month, for example. So here we got the current price of the stock. So this is fine. So what we need to add right below here is to grab some historical price data for this stock, for example. Now, what we want to do is we create for that for sure a new method. Great. So the first thing that we do is we create a new private, let's make it a void right now, private void get hist data for get historical data. And we are sending a parameter and a stock Now, again, we have that token for sure. So you can use any method you like to store that token, for example, in app settings or, well, something similar. Let me just grab from the get price the token and the URL. So it's the fastest way possible for sure. We should optimize that. Well, we will not do that in this video, but you could do that and bring out the token, for example, in app settings, or you could save it in an environment variable on your personal computer. Yeah, something like that. Now let's change the actual URL. So we still got cloud.iexapis.com/v1/stock. And then we add the actual parameter, for example, AAPL for Apple, right? And then we don't go to quote endpoint, we want to go to chart endpoint, and then define that we are looking for 1 month of data. So /chart/1 month. And again, 0 here will be replaced with param because we interpolate that, and 1 will be replaced with token. Awesome. Now let's start getting the value for this. So the response, so var historical data or his data, for example, equals to get data, which is our helper method to just get a response from an actual API. Now that will return us an array. So let's use a JArray, JSON hist equals to JArray dot parse. Let's put in the response, so the historical data. Now let's write a for each loop. For each J object item in that JSON hist array, we want to go. Let's create a temporary float and let's add a cast here from that JSON item open. Open means like the opening price, for example. And then this is just the response that we get from that API, right? So we don't have any control over that. We need to take what we get here. And now let's take our stock from the parameter, because that's the one where we want to add those different values, right? So let's take it, stock dot diff dot add. We want to add that temporary value. Awesome. Now let's go back to our create method below. And here where we got that stocks dot add and all of this, this is for sure how we set up the stock right now. Let's just do that in a different way. So let's create a new stock, right? So stock, new stock equals to new stock. So we have a new stock. Let's first of all, or let me just correct that, new stock, there we go. Let's just change the constructor, because as you can see, we have to submit the values. So just press F12 and go inside of that stock. We could for sure simply go ahead and remove the constructor and make it optional. So what I do is I just go ahead and write down ctor and make it empty constructor, just like that. Awesome. So let me just go back here. Now you can see it's compiling successful for sure. And what we do now is we just set the values in a manual way. So new stock dot, and you can now see the name, for example, is param dot input name or name input. We already got the price, so we can say new stock dot price now is equals to the price that we are getting right here. And let's move back to our stock model and let's just get rid of the starting price, because it will be handled by our diff right here. So let's just remove the starting price. That will for sure result in any reference error right here, but that's just not a problem. We couldn't, you can see this even in the get, we could just really like remove this entire thing right now. So let's just remove stock diff.add. At the very top, you can see that this is for sure also the constructor, and we need to remove that starting price. Great. So scroll down again, compilation errors will be gone. Well, for that part at least. And now we can for sure here also, well, we can actually completely remove that. That's not important anymore. We just need to keep that stocks dot add new stock. That's very important. Awesome. So now we got the name, we got the price now. Let's see what else do we have. We got new stock dot, and you can only see that we got diff left. And diff, we can set that by simply calling our new method. So let's just write down here get historical data, and let's submit the param. So param dot name input. So for which stock you want to do that. And we can simply select new stock here. We could even optimize that when I just think about it and go to the get his data, remove that param here because we also got it inside of our stock. So we can just say stock name. That also makes sense. Yeah, and then we save an entire parameter. Great, so let's remove that first parameter here that we got new stock. Awesome, and that will for sure place the difference or the actual historical data inside of that new stock, and then later on we add the new stock. Okay, let's see if this works out fine. So let's start the application here. And then open up the Sencha application. Let's go to the form. Let's write down AAPL. Let's click on submit. And you can see that we get an error. And that's, well, very easy to explain because it says object reference not set to an instance. And this is because when we just created that stock, we did not initialize the div list. So let's switch over right here to our create method. You can see new stock, right? And here we can simply go ahead and say new stock dot div equals to new list of type float. So in that way we'll not get a null reference. So let's just again start the application, take a look at the Sencha project. So here just go to the form and again write down AAPL. Let's click on submit. You can see success, the stock got added to your wish list. Let's click on OK. Let's switch over to home. Let's update the page. Well, you can see AAPL right here, price now 172, and you can actually see some real data. So now let's just, well, it's a chart which is growing over the last month, which is very nice. So we can really now see a different chart for comparison. Okay, so here I am at nasdaq.com. And well, I'm searching for Apple, right? So AAPL, you can see that symbol right here. Let me set it to 1 month and you will be able to see that the chart will, well, look exactly like what we have, right? So it's started from like 150 and it's now at 170, just like that. And you can see here 150 around that and 170. So this is working actually very, very fine. Awesome. So now we have some real data. The only thing that we really need to remove is the Netflix stock because that one is like no real data. So let's just move over to our backend again. Let's just stop the application and go right into our predefined list here. So list stock new list of stock. And we should really get rid of that hard-coded stock here because we now have validated that our application is working fine. Let's take a final look, start everything and launch the application. Great, so now let's add some new stocks here. So go to form, let's again add AAPL for Apple. Let's in a second step add Google too. GOOG for Google, right? Let's click submit. And let's add Microsoft, so MSFT. Awesome, now let's click on submit again. And then we will have 3 real stocks added to our list. So go to home, update the page. Awesome, and now you can see that we have 3 real stocks inside here with actual values and actual real graph values. So this is quite nice to just think about what you have achieved now, right? So we have a front-end application written down in Sencha. And we have a real backend written down in ASP.NET Core. And that backend is calling some APIs out there to grab some stock data. And we take that response from that API and send it from our backend back to our front end and then build a real user interface. That's quite nice. Great, and so this is the application. You can for sure extend it as you like because you now should know how you can add new forms, show more data, configure widgets and all of that. For sure you will need the Sencha documentation, but that's just how it is in programming, right? And if you want to learn more about web development, for example ASP.NET, don't miss our all access subscription. You can start your free 7-day trial right away and you will get instant access to all of our programming courses, which contain more than 300 hours of high quality programming knowledge, right? So let me just scroll down. Let me just show you what courses are inside there. Well, we have a complete new course right now, which is the C# test-driven development course. We have an ASP.NET Core 6 course, which is really, really huge. It's teaching you a lot of web development stuff. We got Python, we got Android, we got the C# complete masterclass, we got Unity. So there is really a lot of stuff and a lot of value in here. And as I said, you can start your free 7-day trial right away and for sure cancel at any time. So this is a no-brainer for you. Start your trial now. And I'm happy to see you back in the next video. Oh, and in case you haven't subscribed to our channel, definitely do that right now because you don't want to miss any of our programming videos. And if you have any wishes for new content, so if you want to see a specific framework or topic, just write it down in the comments below.